Hello, I'm Brad Green. I manage the Angular team here at Google. Thanks for coming tonight. We've got a great talk by Jacob of the Firebase team, going to show us some fun things. Afterward, Jeremy from the Angular team is going to show us the current state of material design and with a short lightning talk. As always, we would love you to ask questions. If you ask a question, make sure it's something that you're okay with having broadcast to the interwebs and stored forever on YouTube. So when we normally up here, I will give a little, hey, what's cool and going on in the world of Angular? Because we're going to be at Angular U next week, and Jeff, can we switch to the please just join us next Monday. Come in person if you can, and if you can't, please join us on the live stream. Mishko, Igor, and I will talk about the current state of Angular and all kinds of cool things that are going on. So a couple surprises for sure. I think it'll be fun. With that, I'd actually like to welcome Jacob up and give him a hand. We're going to hear about some fun stuff.
Thanks a lot, Brad. Everybody hear me okay? All right. So as Brad said, my name is Jacob Wenger. I am a core developer on the Firebase team at Google. Specifically, I work on our website, our authentication service, and our hosting service a little bit. So today, I'm going to focus about telling you a little bit about authentication in Angular, as well as how you can use Firebase to make this pretty simple. So let's go ahead and get started. So big goal of the talk is to tell you that authentication kind of sucks, and it's really difficult. There's lots of gotchas. It is not a really fun thing to deal with, but it doesn't have to be for you. And there's a lot of tools out there nowadays that can actually make authentication really easy and very powerful. So why does authentication suck? For one, it requires your own server. So this is kind of a very basic thing. You're going to have to spin up your own server if you're talking with, say, like a social provider. You may need to exchange secrets back and forth. If you need to validate users in your database, you're going to need some server that's going to be looking up things in your database and validating those passwords. Just having your own server alone takes up a lot of extra time for you. Now you have to deal with maintaining a server, dealing with it if it goes down, and essentially doing a lot of ops work, which otherwise you wouldn't have to do and are not required for your app. On top of this, sure, you're able to authenticate users. Now you have to add all these user management tools. You need to be able to create new users, delete existing users. You need to deal with resetting passwords, which includes now you have to send emails to confirm those resetting of the passwords. So a lot of extra things get tacked on, and these have all really been solved by now. And so doing it yourself is just a lot of extra work. On top of that, if you want to deal with any social providers, there are just myriad different versions of OAuth out there. Everyone is slightly different. Everyone has slight different bugs in them, and you're going to have to deal with all of them if you want to integrate. On top of that, security is just hard. We see every week there's a new security bug. Just today, I saw LastPass had a big security issue. We see these time and time again. Even the NSA is not immune to these kinds of things. And so doing it yourself is just, there's a good chance you're going to do it wrong. And it's really hard to get right and takes a lot of work. And then on top of that, one thing which I don't think gets enough credit is dealing with offline is even harder. If you're a mobile app and you are trying to deal with users who may not have the best internet connection, when their internet goes down, you want to be able to still let them use your app and not just throw up a big blocking screen which says, hey, you can't write during this time. So dealing with authenticated writes while offline is a pretty difficult problem. So there are a couple different ways that you can do authentication. I kind of want to walk you through what they look like. We can actually see why these are actually a little difficult. So the traditional way of doing authentication is using cookies. So you have a client and you have a server, and the process starts by the client sending the server a bunch of different credentials. Usually this is in the form of an email and a password. Then the server will go ahead and create a session, which is a stateful identity on the server. And so there's going to be a list of different session IDs, and then the server is going to go ahead and create a new one. And then from the session ID, it can go ahead and look up user data, and then it can use that data to actually fulfill the request. So it goes ahead and creates a stateful session, and then it sends back a cookie, which includes that session ID, back to the client. Then with every following request, the client will go ahead and send that cookie along, and the server will have to take the session ID from the cookie. It will look up the session in its session store, and then it will go ahead and verify that it exists there, grab the user data, fulfill the request, and then send the response back to the client. So like nothing too crazy going on here, but there are a few things that are not ideal. So let's look at some flaws in this whole thing. Probably the biggest one is that this requires stateful servers. So every server, say in this example of one server, you go ahead and authenticate to it. It creates a new session, and now every subsequent time, it actually has to store the state. If the server goes down or it has to get restarted, now you need to make sure you're persisting this state somewhere. Also, if you want to move now to 2 servers, you need to make sure you're sharing state between the 2 servers. Because if the first request goes to server A and they create a new session ID, and then the next request goes to server B and doesn't have that session ID, then server B will think that that client is not authenticated when really it actually is. So there's this whole extra problem now. You have to make sure that you're managing state properly. On top of this, from the session ID, it doesn't actually have any user data in it. We actually have to do an extra lookup on the server in our session store to actually grab that user data. And so this is valuable time when we are trying to fill requests as fast as we can. On top of this, cookies are limited to a single domain. So if you're on google.com and you authenticate, you're given a session ID and you store that in a cookie at google.com, and you go over to gmail.com, you actually don't have access to that cookie. The browser is preventing you from grabbing it. And so this is not an ideal solution for if you want to have multiple different apps at different domains. Another thing is that cookies are susceptible to CSRF. So I'm not going to go too much into these guys, but essentially this is something you need to be careful about when you are using cookies, making sure that people aren't able to put vulnerabilities on your site where people can actually read your cookies when you don't want them to. Things like Angular do help you a little bit with this by preventing some of the common cases, but these are not, it's not a cure-all. On top of that, cookies don't have great mobile support. So the mobile browser support for cookies is very spotty. And on top of that, if you're in an app setting, you don't really have a browser to store cookies in. So we need something else. So what is that something else? As of late, the big way to do authentication is using these things called JSON Web Tokens, JWTs. So let's look at what a JWT is. A JWT has 3 parts to it. So here I color-coded them. Each part is separated by a period. And let's take a look at what each of these is. The first part in blue is what's called the header of the JWT. What this is going to do is it gives you the type of token that this is. So here we have a type of JWT, and then an algorithm that we're going to sign the signature with. And we'll get to the signature in a second. So here we're going to use like an HMAC 256, which is an encryption algorithm. The other thing we have in the middle is the claims or the payload. And this is some arbitrary user data, which allows you to actually store your user data. And so here, this token is in an OpenID format, which is a type of JWT. And you have a subject, which is Wenger, which identifies the user. So that's my username. And then there's an EXP, which is the expiration date. And this is just a Unix timestamp. And so you're probably wondering how we actually get from the thing in the on the left over to the thing on the right. And all it is it's a base 64 encoding. We're not encrypting. So if I go ahead and take this string over here on the left, throw it in any base 64 encoder, I can go ahead and get this object out here on the right. Same thing goes for the thing in yellow. So this is not something you want to store sensitive information in because it's just encoded. It's not encrypted. So how do we actually encrypt this token and verify that the server we wanted, that our app generated it? That's what we use the last part, which is the signature. So we go ahead and take the header. We base 64 encode it. So we get this string over here on the left. We add the string in blue. We add the string in blue and the string in yellow. And then we add some secret that the server knows. And this is the key part here. So there's some secret that the clients never see. And we add that to the header and the payload. And then we use the algorithm specified in our header, which is this HMAC SHA-256. And we take that of the whole string. And now we get this string over here on the left, which is encrypted. And this is actually where the security comes in the token. So talking a little bit about these, again, the big thing is these are not encrypted. These are just encoded. So the claims that you put in there with custom data don't store things like secrets or access tokens or anything like that. You want to just put like user data that is not sensitive. Instead of storing these in cookies, we're actually going to store these in local storage. It has some nice benefits that cookies do not have, which I'll get to in a second. Another important thing to realize here is that these JWTs still need to be generated on a server and validated on a server. You need the secret to generate the tokens, and you need a secret to then decode the tokens and validate them. And so that's something that you're never going to actually share with the client. So it still has the same issue with cookies as like we still need a server to do this authentication. Just to give you a quick idea of what generating JWTs looks like, it's very simple. We say we have some JWT library. There's tons of those out there. All you need to do is say new JWT, pass it your secret, which your server knows. Then go ahead and say generate token and pass it any arbitrary JSON object. That will go ahead and spit out your JWT, which again looks something like the thing on the right. Then given that JWT, we can actually validate it, again, by just creating a new instance of our JWT library, passing it the secret, and then calling decode token on it. Passing it the token, and then we can grab the claims from it, and here we get that same JSON object that we saw in the last slide. So what does this look like from the client and the server? It's very similar to what we saw with cookies with a few key differences. So it starts the same way. The client goes ahead and sends some credentials to the server, email and password. Instead of creating a new stateful session on the server is actually going to generate a new JWT. So it's going to use that code that we saw in 2 slides ago and generate this new big string and then send it back to the client. So now this client has this token that was generated from the server, which it can now use to authenticate to our server. So now, again, with every request, we're going to send the JWT. And instead of sending this as a cookie like we did earlier, we're actually going to send this as a header. So we're going to send this in the authorization header. We're going to pass along our JWT. Then the server will grab the JWT. It already has the secret, and it will go ahead and use that secret to decode the token, verify it, and now it has all the user data that we've stored in the claims of the JWT, and it can go ahead and fulfill the request, and then go ahead and send the response back to the client. So why is this better than we saw with cookies? The big one is that state is now kept in our client, or in the JWT itself. We don't have to do a lookup on the server. We don't have to worry about if we scale to multiple servers that we have to share state between them. We can go ahead and pass that JWT if we got it, if it was generated on server A, and then we send it to server B to fulfill the next request. The server, as long as the servers are sharing the secret, we can go ahead and generate and validate across all of them. Also, works across multiple domains. So we don't have the issue with cookies where we could only do it on one domain. JWTs are just strings. We can go ahead and pass those from any domain we want through the authorization header, and we are good to go. Also on this note, works just as well on mobile as it does on the web. Again, cookie support on mobile is not great, but we're just passing a string with our request, and so go ahead and use it on mobile as much as you want. One kind of key point here is that anyone who has the secret can actually generate and also validate these tokens. So if you wanted to integrate with a third party, all you would have to do is make sure that third party has access to your secret, share your secret with them, and then they can go ahead and validate any tokens that you generate. If you think about this from the cookie world, you would somehow have to share your session IDs with that third party instead of just a secret. So now that third party needs to know like how your session IDs are generated, and also given a session ID, how to actually look up the user data, which is just not a practical way to do it. But with the JWTs, all they need is your secret. They can go ahead and decode the token and grab all the user data from it. One word of warning is that these aren't vulnerable to CSRF, but they are vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So if you do have a cross-site scripting vulnerability on your site, you should fix it first, but also make sure that these things aren't around, because anyone can read your local storage if they can run arbitrary JavaScript on your site. So you probably have other big problems with cross-site scripting attacks, but one of them is that they can steal your JWTs. So this is all great, like JWTs for the win. This is a much better mechanism than using cookies, but like, how do we actually get the claims data? How do we actually know what to put in our JWT? there's kind of like this missing thing. There's like, yeah, the server can generate them, but what goes inside? So this is actually, in my opinion, what makes authentication hard. So let's talk about things we know. We know we still need a server to generate these JWTs. We have a secret which we're never going to share with our client. So there's one thing that's hard. The next thing is we need a database to maybe store users. Maybe we want to roll our own authentication, do email password-based authentication. And so now we're going to have to set up a server and read and write from that. And now we're going to have to store passwords, which in and of itself is a tricky business. You have to figure out how you're going to salt your passwords. You can think about how you hash your passwords. What work factor are you going to use to encrypt your passwords? There's all these things which go into password storage to make sure that they're not easy to crack. Also, you need to now make sure that like no one has access to your passwords, which again, security is hard, as LastPass has found out. The other thing is OAuth is really a nightmare. How many people here have actually like worked with OAuth? All right, about like half the room has. Anyone enjoy working with OAuth? All right, yeah, no one has. No one raised their hand. So this is a typical like OAuth authentication flow. You got things like consumer keys and consumer secrets and nonces and timestamps and all of these crazy words. And it's just like, what is going on here? I don't really understand how any of this works. I deal with this every day, and I still don't really understand how it works. The thing that's really frustrating about this is you have one of these charts for every single provider. And each one is slightly different. Each one has different bugs in it that are just around forever now that like the OAuth, their OAuth implementation has been done. So this is where something like Firebase really comes in and helps you out and makes your life significantly easier. So what exactly is Firebase? Firebase is a powerful platform for building extraordinary apps. Firebase really can be your backend. It allows you to do things like authentication without requiring your own server. And all of those things about like why auth is hard, Firebase will actually solve for you. So the different pieces of Firebase are the authentication piece, which we're going to focus on today, the real-time database, which allows you to store and sync data between a bunch of different clients in real time. And then the last part is Firebase hosting, which allows you to put something like your static Angular app up on the World Wide Web. And we'll actually see a demo of that as well. Firebase comes in different libraries. So there are cross-platform SDKs for the web, which we'll play with today. There's one for iOS and also one for Android. So if you want to make an application, you can go ahead and make it cross-platform without having to deal with any server-side code. And you can go ahead and use a very similar API across all the different platforms. So quickly, before we jump into the authentication, I want to talk a little bit about the real-time sync. So if you've used Firebase before, this is probably the thing that you're most familiar with. The way this works is essentially whenever a client writes to our database, whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's a tablet, or it's a Firebase, they will go ahead and write directly to Firebase from the client. And then Firebase will handle notifying every other connected client that data has changed. And this is a very simple way to share information across whatever devices you want in real time in just hundreds of milliseconds without having to actually deal with any of that networking or WebSocket code. So today, as I told you, we're going to focus on authentication, not the real-time database. So what is our authentication service? Now you guys know what JWTs are. Firebase Authentication is a JWT-based authentication service. Again, no servers required. All we need is client-side code. We offer a bunch of different authentication types, including anonymous authentication, email password authentication, as well as interfacing with a bunch of different OAuth providers. And then if you still want something, you already have an authentication service, or you want to kind of roll your own, you can go ahead and generate your own JWTs. You saw what it takes to do that. And then we will go ahead and interface with that as well. Finally, all of our mobile clients work completely offline, so that whenever a user has intermittent network and doesn't have internet but is authenticated and can still interact with your app, can still write. Obviously can't read new data, but it will still be able to read the existing data in the cache. And then when the user comes back online, Firebase handles merging all of the data they have on their device with the data that's changed on the Firebase servers. And it all works with authentication as well. So what does this actually look like? Your Firebase is actually stored at a URL. So here we have my name of my Firebase, which in this case is ng-auth at firebaseio.com. So this is a URL to my distinct Firebase app. So I can go ahead and create a new instance of Firebase by calling new Firebase and passing the URL. Then to authenticate, I can go ahead and just call auth with password, passing it an email and a password of a user that already exists in my Firebase. And then if it's successful, I'll go ahead and get a response with the auth data, which includes things like the user identifier, as well as what their email is, maybe some other metadata you have on the user. The other thing you're going to want to do is you want to detect whether or not someone's logged into your app. So again, you can go ahead and just create a new instance of Firebase, call this onAuth method, which essentially will fire this callback every single time that authentication state changes. So whenever a user logs out or logs into your app, this will fire. And we can go ahead and then grab the authentication data whether if it's going to be if there is authentication data, that means a user has just logged in, and we can go ahead and grab their credentials. Otherwise, the user has just logged out, and this is going to be auth data will be null. Finally, we have creating users. Very similar. We grab a reference to our Firebase. We call create user. We pass it an email password. And if it's successful, we get a user data object, which has the user ID, which is a unique identifier for that new user. So this is all great. This works like on any JavaScript site that you want. But like we're here to talk about Angular. So how does this work with Firebase? So we have a library called AngularFire, which essentially provides bindings between Angular and Firebase. So you get the best of both worlds. We provide a set of services that bind data between Firebase and Angular, and also to authenticate and manage your users. And AngularFire handles all of the digest loop, all of the compiling for you, which is really the big thing you gain from here. You get a slightly nicer, more Angular-like API, but really the big thing is we're going to deal with making sure we update and apply when we need to, and not overdo it, and you just don't have to worry about any of those things. So what are the services that AngularFire provides? The first is Firebase Array, which are synchronized arrays. So you can imagine if you had a chat application, you could go ahead and use this Firebase Array service to go ahead and sync all of your chat messages in real time. The other one is Firebase Object for doing synchronized objects. You can imagine you have a profile object that you want to sync in real time. And then the last thing, which we're going to talk about today, is Firebase Auth. This allows you to do authentication, user management, and also routing. So let's take a look at Firebase Auth. The first thing we need to do is when we create our new Angular app, new module, we're going to go ahead and pass in the Firebase, the AngularFire library by doing Firebase right here. Then now we have access to all of the different services that I just mentioned. So we can go ahead and use dependency injection and inject Firebase Auth into any controller, factory, or service that we want. So here we're injecting Firebase Auth into this controller. We're going to go ahead and create a new reference to our Firebase, passing it our Firebase URL. And then we can go ahead and pass that reference now to the Firebase Auth service to get this scope.auth object. And the scope.auth object we can go ahead and use to authenticate users. So here we're calling scope.auth object. And instead of auth with password, we're going to do $auth with password. And instead of giving you a callback, we're actually going to return a promise. So here we pass it our email and password. And then if it's successful, we'll go to the then, and we'll pass the auth data. Otherwise, we'll go to the catch, and we'll have an error. Detecting auth state looks almost identical as we saw earlier. Instead of onAuth, we have $onAuth, and the callback is exactly the same. We get passed auth data. If there is any auth data, we're logged in. Otherwise, we're logged out. And again, the big thing here that you get from $onAuth that you don't get with onAuth is we're going to handle the whole digest loop updating for you. Finally, we have create user. Go through real quick. We have email password. Again, we return a promise. If it's successful, we'll have user data. Otherwise, we'll have an error. So going to get to some live coding in just a second. But one last thing I want to talk about is route-based security. So dealing with authentication, there's going to be lots of cases where you want to create a multi-page app. And say you have a login screen, you have a home screen, you have an account page. You want to make sure that if a user's not logged in and they go to the account page, that you don't get that whole flash of unauthenticated content, where you see some authenticated content, without everything filled in, and then you realize, oh, the user's not actually logged in, so I'm going to redirect them back to the login screen. So AngularFire has some helpers to actually make this easy for you. So we have helper promises, which you can use in the resolve method of the different routers. So the two of these are wait for auth. This will essentially just hold until we know whether or not the user's logged in. We don't care whether or not they're logged in. All I'm going to say is I'm going to wait until we actually know. The other one is require auth. This will actually wait until we know if they're logged in or not. And if they're logged out, we can go ahead and throw an error. And then we can listen for that error and go ahead and move them to, say, the login screen. And both of these work in NGRoute and UIRouter. So let's take a look at that code real quick. So here's NGRoute. We have a route provider.when to /account. Normal boilerplate stuff with we define a controller, we define a template of where what this view is going to be displayed as. And then in our resolve method, we're going to go ahead and say wait for auth. And this essentially will not show this screen until we actually know whether or not they're authenticated. Same thing with UIRouter, almost identical code, except we're going to use state provider, and we're going to use state instead of route provider and when. So let's go ahead and jump into some live coding. This is the more exciting part of the talk. So what I'm going to build is an application that logs in with GitHub, shows some profile information from me, and also lists the different repos that I'm an owner of. So I'm going to start from scratch pretty much. I do have some styles in here just because I'm not a CSS whiz, and I don't want to be tripping over those the whole time. So let's just get started with our index.html. So we go ahead and create a new file. I'm just going to bootstrap a new app. We're going to call it Angular plus Firebase auth. And then we're going to have to include a bunch of different libraries. So the first thing we need to do is we need to include Firebase. And we're going to do the latest version of Firebase, which is 2.2.7. The next thing we need is Angular. So we'll include latest Angular, which is 1.4.0. And then the next thing we need is AngularFire. So again, we need the binding library between Firebase and Angular. And this is on 1.1.1. So now we got all the different JavaScript libraries we need. We're also going to have a local JavaScript file. So let's put that in app.js. And then just for some CSS, we're going to go ahead and include Bootstrap. And we'll grab 3.3.4, which is the latest there. And then we also want to include our local CSS file. So that's at css styles.css. So now we got a link to everything. And we can go ahead and actually start creating our app. So what we're going to go first is we want to have like login button and a logout button. So let's go ahead and I define in CSS, I have this class panel, which is going to make a nice little panel for me. And we're going to have an input, or we'll have a button, which will say when that button's clicked, we'll go ahead and call our login method. And we'll say login with GitHub. And then we'll also have another identical panel down here, which is going to be our logout panel. So we'll just have a logout button. So we'll go ahead and spin up a server at 8080. Head back here. Make sure we included everything properly. So it looks like it couldn't find app.js. That's fine. We haven't defined that yet. And so here we go. We got login button, logout button, although they don't do anything yet. So let's go ahead and actually build those. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new app. We'll name it app. And we need to inject our AngularFire library. So again, we just passed the string Firebase. So the next thing we're going to do is actually let's create an instance of Firebase auth. So we'll go ahead and create a new controller. We'll call it auth controller. And then we'll inject scope as well as Firebase auth. OK, so using the code we saw earlier, we do var ref equals new Firebase. We pass it our Firebase ref. And then we go ahead and say, auth object is going to equal Firebase auth and pass it the ref. So we can go ahead and use this auth object in this controller, and it would totally work. One thing I like to do is since you'll find that if you have an app with a bunch of different controllers, you're going to have a lot of this boilerplate creating this Firebase auth instance. I like to go ahead and put this in a factory. And so let's say we have an auth factory, which is going to take Firebase auth, and then we can grab this code, throw it up here, and instead of setting it to a local object, we'll go ahead and just return it. And so now whenever I need a reference to my auth object, I can go ahead and just inject that auth factory. So now I can go ahead and define my login function. And all we're going to say is auth, and it's auth with OAuth popup. So what we saw on the slides was auth with password. That's for email password users. This auth with OAuth popup will actually do what you typically see when you see a login flow with any of the social providers. You get a little pop-up box. You fill in your credentials on Facebook or on GitHub, and then it sends you back to the parent page. So we'll go ahead and just say we're going to auth with GitHub, and then this is going to return a promise. So we'll say function auth data. And for now, we'll just console.log that auth data. And if we have an error, we'll go ahead and grab the error, and we'll console.error there. And then we'll do something for scope.logout. Scope.logout, the code is very simple. All we're going to say is auth.$unoff. And so this will go ahead and just log out the current session. So if we head back here, refresh our page, hit login with GitHub, we got nothing. So I forgot to actually bootstrap my app. So we go to ng app, we set it equal to app, and then we go to body and say ng controller is going to equal our auth controller. So now if we retry it, there we go. We actually get our pop-up, and so now we're taken to GitHub, and we can go ahead and say, yep, I want to authorize this application. Head back down here, and I'm given this auth object from Firebase. So just to recap, with all the code that we wrote, this right here, we were able to do OAuth authentication. And that is the beauty of Firebase and doing client-side authentication. And so it's very, very simple. So now looking at this object a little bit closer, there's kind of 3 different levels of content that we send back to you. So the first is just details about the actual authentication event. So we have when the auth token expires, we have our JWT right here. So you can see this guy is that thing we talked about earlier. That's our JWT that we're going to send back and forth with Firebase to actually authenticate to the Firebase servers. Tells us it's the provider is GitHub, and then we get a unique identifier for that user. This is going to be unique for every user in your application. The second level of content we have is content that Firebase goes ahead and provides for all providers. So we go to this GitHub. Every provider is going to have an access token. This is the access token we can use now to authenticate to GitHub itself. Also, we have a display name, which has my name. We'll have an email. If I had an email, a public email set up, I have it private, so we get just the empty string. My GitHub ID and my GitHub username. And then there's also this third level of content, which is content we actually get from GitHub itself. So here we have a link to my avatar, my bio, a link to my blog, all these different things. It tells me the one we're going to use is this repos URL to actually grab the repos that I'm involved with. So this is pretty cool. One thing we'll notice is now if I refresh the page, nothing actually happens. I don't have any access to the auth data. I actually have to hit login with GitHub again to get that auth data. So let's go ahead and fix that. So instead of setting auth data here, let's go ahead and say auth.onAuth. And so whenever the auth data changes, including when we refresh the page and we get the first authentication state, we'll go ahead and just say scope.authData equals auth data. And for now, let's just go ahead and log that guy. And since we're doing all getting the authentication state changes here, whenever we do this auth with OAuth pop-up and we get this completed, it will fire this $on-off. So we don't really need this then anymore. So now if we refresh the page, you see we get the auth data right away. And so since we can go ahead and log out, log back in. You see every single time the auth data changes, we do log that to the console. Obviously, like we don't want the login button showing up all the time when we're already logged in. So let's go ahead and head back here, and we'll put an ng hide if we have auth data. And over here, we'll do the opposite, an ng show. If we don't have auth data, then we want to go ahead, or if we do have auth data, we want to go ahead and show our logout button. And now let's get rid of this guy. And so if we refresh, we're not logged in. Now we hit login. We're logged in, and we're showing the logout button. And so that whole flow is looking like we have the beginnings of an authenticated app. So now the first thing we want to do is when I'm logged in, I kind of want to show some profile information. So we'll head back down here, and I'll grab an image, which we'll need to give the URL for that image. And I'm actually going to move back here and console.log my auth data again, so I can show you where we can find that image URL. All right, refresh. And so if we go in here, we go to GitHub, we go to cache user profile, we see this guy right here, avatar URL is going to contain my user avatar. So let's go ahead and put that in here. We'll say authData.github.cacheduserprofile.avatar URL. And then let's also go ahead and put my display name. Yes, equal sign. That is important. And then over here, we'll go ahead and do authData.github, and we'll see that we want to display my name, and that's in this second level of data. So that's one Firebase provides you for all different auth types. So we can go ahead and say .displayName. And then if we refresh, we should go ahead and see my profile picture as well as my display name. So there we were, like getting data from GitHub with very, very little effort. So the last thing we want to do is actually use our access token that we're given from Firebase and grab the different repos that I am an owner of. So let's go ahead and add a new panel. And we'll go ahead and give it a little title, which is going to be repositories. And we'll have an unordered list of our repos. And so we'll use some Bootstrap class names just to give it some nice styling. And for each item, we'll say it's a class is going to be list group item. This is, again, another Bootstrap class. And we'll do an ng repeat, where we'll go ahead and repeat through repo in repos. So we're going to have to define some scope.repos that contains all the different repo information that we have. And then the last thing we'll do is we will just say it's going to be repo.full name. And so now let's go ahead and define this scope.repos. So we're going to say down here, function get repos. And we're going to go ahead and we need to make an auth or a request to the GitHub API. So we're going to go ahead and use the HTTP service. So we'll say http.get, and the URL we want to hit, we can actually grab from our cache user profile. So we go to GitHub, cache user profile. All the way down here at the bottom, we have this repos URL. And so looking at this data, if we hit the API, we actually get a list of the different repos that I'm an owner of. And you see we have the full name right here. So let's go ahead and use this guy. We'll say scope.authData.cacheduserprofile.repos URL. And this is going to have a success, which will actually get our repos. And we'll go ahead and say scope.repos equals repos. And if I coded this wrong, we'll get an error, in which case we will go ahead and just do a console.error. And then the last thing we need to do is actually call this method. And so we'll do that in our on-auth. If we have auth data, if the user is actually logged in, let's go ahead and call get repos. All right. And then one final thing is we obviously don't want this panel to show up if we are not authenticated. So we'll go ahead and do an ng show only if we have auth data. And now, if we go ahead and refresh, we actually see our repo information. And so we were able to now use, authenticate to GitHub, and then go ahead and use that data, the URL we got from there, to actually make a request to GitHub and get our repo information. And so we were able to make this little app. It works, when we log in and log out. And all of that took, how much lines of code did we do? We did, a handful of, 40 lines of HTML and like less than 40 lines of JavaScript. And we built like an application that like has some meat to it. And you can imagine where you can go from here. You can go ahead and you could make a code review tool by asking for a few other permissions from GitHub, and then using the GitHub API to grab like what are the different comments on this pull request and all those different things. And you can do all of this very simply without having to have any knowledge of OAuth and without any server at all. And so I have this app. It's kind of cool. I can play with it. You guys can actually use it. It's just stored on localhost. So let's go ahead and fix that. So let's go ahead and kill our local server. And we'll use something called Firebase hosting. So Firebase hosting allows you to take your application and put it up into the World Wide Web you'll see in just under a minute, probably. So what we have is a node module. So you can go ahead and do npm install a global Firebase tools. And this will give you a local Firebase command. And so I'm not actually going to do that. But if we run Firebase, you see I have now access to this Firebase command line utility. And so I can go ahead and say, to initialize my app, I can say Firebase init. And this is going to ask me which Firebase app would I like to connect this current repository to. And so I'll say, OK, I want to do the ng-auth. And then it's going to say, what directory do I want to actually deploy to my website? And so since I'm already in the directory where I want to deploy, I just hit enter. And now I have this firebase.json file. And here we have the name of the Firebase app, which is ng-auth, and then the directory that I'm going to deploy, which is just the local directory, and then a bunch of files to ignore. So like we don't need to send the firebase.json to our web server. We also don't need to send all of our node modules. So then all we need to do is say Firebase deploy. And what's going to happen here is we're going to locally package up all of your different files and then ship them off to Firebase. And now you can go ahead and access your files on firebase.com or firebaseapp.com. So if we hit Firebase open, you saw how quick all of that happened. Now I have a thing on the World Wide Web at ngauth.firebaseapp.com. Every Firebase app comes with a free domain that you can go ahead and use to put up your application. And you'll notice a few things. One is that this is on HTTPS. So we will actually provision an SSL certificate for you for free, so you can put your site up on HTTPS. On top of that, Firebase hosting is backed by a global CDN. So anywhere in the world, people will be able to get the files from a local server. Instead of if you set up your own server and say you set it up in San Francisco, then you'd have to, if someone was in Australia, they'd have to come all the way to San Francisco to get that file and all the way back. With Firebase hosting, automatically when you do Firebase deploy, we deploy it around the world, and then anyone will get a local file much faster than they would otherwise. And like you guys saw how easy that was to get set up, from not having a website to now having a website with SSL and a CDN. And there's other nice features like one-click rollbacks and a bunch of other tools that you can use with Firebase hosting. So if you want to play along with this app, you can go ahead and go to the ngauth.firebaseapp.com. I'll leave that open. I'll leave that up even after the talk. So this link should stay good forever. So just to kind of like recap what we went over today, the big thing I wanted to get you guys to see is like authentication is not easy. There's lots of hard things that happen. Not only like setting up your own server, but also like dealing with getting what's actually you're going to put in your JWT. And so these are not simple things, but there are really good solutions out there. Firebase, I think, is one of the best, and it makes it super simple for you to do authentication. A hard problem is now very simple. We do the same thing with real-time data. If you haven't played around with the Firebase real-time database, I definitely suggest it. You'll see it has the same kind of simplicity as our authentication service has. And then you also saw how easy it was to get up and running with Firebase hosting. The goal of Firebase is to take all these things that normally require a backend and require a lot of ops and infrastructure time, and just eliminate those and let you focus on actually just building applications, whether it's a mobile app or whether it's a website. So if you're interested in getting started, you can go ahead and go to firebase.com/docs. You can also go, there's a quick 5-minute tutorial at firebase.com/tutorial. Just to show you what these look like, if you go to our docs, I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see, choose which platform you're going to be using, web, iOS, or Android. We also have a REST API if you want to use it in Python or some other language. We go ahead here to web. There's a 5-minute quick start. There's a step-by-step guide, which will take you, from beginner to advanced. And then there's a full API reference. On top of that, there is a whole section on AngularFire, if you want to go ahead and use it in your Angular app. Again, a quick start, a guide, and a full API reference. All right, so that was my talk, Authentication in Angular. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to start a conversation on Twitter. If you want to use Firebase, let me know. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm at _J Wenger. Also at Firebase, we follow our Twitter very closely and more than happy to have conversations with you there. Also, if you want the code from today's live coding, you can go here to my GitHub, jwenger/ng-auth. There I'll put the slides up here. I'll put the code, a link to the demo, and then as well as the video once that's up. So thanks a lot.
So hello, my name is Jeremy Elbourn, and I am a member of the Angular team working on Angular Material. If you are unfamiliar with the library, Angular Material is an effort by the Angular team to create a set of common reusable UI components built in Angular that implement Google's Material design specification. Our website that you see here is material.angularjs.org, where we have our Getting Started guide, demos, and API documentation. And to give you an idea of the kind of components we have, we'll just take a look at a couple of the simple ones. So here we have buttons, we have checkboxes, notice the nice ink ripples, we have modal dialogues, and a whole lot more, including much more complicated ones. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is what have we been working on in Angular Material, and what are we going to be working on in the future? So we've had a pretty busy year. We've had 3 major releases so far, and I'm going to show off some of the more recent components that we've landed in the library. So the first thing I'm going to show you are our chips. You are probably familiar with this UI from Gmail when you're composing a message in your to field and you are entering in values that get turned into these chips. So here we have a set of chips that are for fruits, so I can add my own plum, turn it into a chip. These chips in this demo right here are using a custom template, and in this case the template just adds this little word fruit in parentheses after whatever you entered, but it could be any arbitrary template you want to use. I can click on any of these and move around with the arrow keys or move back to the input to type more. I can press delete to get rid of one, just like you could expect. We also have a default chip template that will just turn things into this gray rounded corners chip. On top of that, we also provide for you, right, max scroll the other direction. A contact chip as a shortcut for if you want to specifically put contacts in your application. And this works very well with our autocomplete, which is another one of our components, to let you build a really cool interaction without actually having to do a lot of work. So that's really cool. A couple more components that were released in our 0.10 just yesterday were, firstly, our menu, which is something people have been wanting for a long time. It's in an initial state right now where it's just trigger and menu, but we are going to be adding more features as we make more releases, and you can see you can put any arbitrary content inside of your menu items. Like here we have some icons. And One of the cool things about our demo site is that when you want to see what the source code for any one of these demos is, you can just click right here and you get the source, and you can see how easy it is to put in one of these components on your application. So here we just have an MD menu component. Inside of that, we have whatever the trigger for your menu is going to be. In this case, it's a button that has an icon in it. And then you put in your menu content, which could be anything you want. In this case, it is a couple of menu items. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. If you want to look at the JavaScript or the CSS, this is all here. And really cool, if you want to try this out for yourself, make some edits, you have this button here, Edit on CodePen. You click that, and you go over to a CodePen with this demo open, and you can just start editing it right away. A couple of other components that we've come out with recently, these were actually from a community contributor rather than someone on the core team, which was really fantastic. We have this fab toolbar and fab speed dial. So the fab speed dial you might be familiar with if you've used Google Inbox. This is where you have this fab, which is a floating action button. And when you move into it, it expands out into this set of buttons. And this is very configurable. You can data bind to whether it's opened or closed. You can change the direction. Right now, this is going up. We can change it to go left or right or down. And you can change the animation. So right now, it's flinging these buttons out from the root. Or you can change it so that the buttons just kind of scale in from nothing. And you notice there's a slight delay as they do that, which is really fancy. We also have this fab toolbar, which is another fab that you can hover over. Expands into a toolbar that has other actions in it. You can, again, data bind whether this is open or closed, and check whether it's on the right or the left of your page. We have some really exciting users starting to pick up these components and put them into production, including if you go to history.google.com, it shows your search and activity on Google Apps. Another is Google Contributor, which is a cool experiment from Google that lets people make contributions directly to publishers to avoid seeing ads, which is neat. So that covers what we've been doing. A little bit more about what we are going to do. We have a lot more components in the works. Currently, we are working on a date picker, which is a very complicated component that we are going to try to make very simple for you to use, and a virtual repeat, which is going to be something that works just like ng repeat, but only renders so many items that can fit on the page at one time or fit in the size of the box you've given it. And this is really great for when you have a very large number of items you want to repeat over, but performance is a very big concern of yours. So those should be landing soon, hopefully in our next release. We'll see how it goes. We're also going to be working on a number of performance and stability improvements, as well as making sure all of the components really play well together. All of this, by the way, all of these components right now work perfectly with Angular 1.3 and Angular 1.4. If you're wondering about Angular 2, we have some prototypal components built in Angular 2 that have been ported from the Angular 1 version. But because Angular 2 is still itself in a very early stage, those components are really just experiments and making sure that Angular 2 works. So that is it for me. If we have any questions, I can answer them when we all get together up here.
I've gotten some pushback from my coworkers in the past for storing JWTs in local storage. They're saying there's some security implications. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that could be a bad idea, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. You definitely, the biggest thing, as I mentioned, is you still have to be careful for cross-site scripting attacks. So if someone can run arbitrary JavaScript on your page because of a cross-site scripting vulnerability, then they can go ahead and grab anything you have in local storage, and they can grab someone's JWT. So that's like probably the biggest thing. And you'll see there are lots of big apps out there who have these cross-site scripting attacks or vulnerabilities, and you see those are really hard to prevent. So that would probably be the biggest thing. The other thing is that yes, this is like the JWT allows you to authenticate to the server. And so if someone has your JWT, then like they can go ahead and pretend to be you. The nice thing that you have with JWTs versus like sending some like permanent thing like a secret to the client is that the JWT has an expiration on it. And so by default, JWTs through Firebase authentication are 24 hours. It's fully configurable. You could make it 10 years if you wanted to, but I would not suggest doing that. So if if you set it to 24 hours, someone steals your JWT, and then you could go ahead and like they could be you for 24 hours. But after that time, Firebase starts rejecting those tokens. So yes, you need to be careful. You need to make sure you don't have cross-site scripting attacks or vulnerabilities. But that's you have other issues also if you have those on your page.
Different question for both of you, actually. First, on Firebase, is the offline mode something new? Because I don't remember that being there.
Yeah, so the true off, so all of them have always been, all three libraries have dealt with offline. The big thing that is new for the mobile is that if the app actually restarts before they reconnect with a connection and they reboot up the app, we will actually still be able to sync that data because now we persist it to disk.
So if I have an Angular Firebase-based web app that I've wrapped in PhoneGap, let's say, I can take that offline and that's still going to work. And then when it reconnects, it's going to resynchronize my data.
So with the JavaScript library, if the app is restarted, no. With the mobile clients, yes. So offline mode is not as good on the web, but it still will work as long as the app is not restarted.
Okay.
But that is coming eventually.
All right. And then on the interface stuff, really quick, I'm assuming I can change the colors because red blue is a problem for colorblind.
Yeah, we have a full theming solution, and you can check out our API docs to see how the theming works.
Cool.
Yeah, so for Firebase, so we have offline mobile app authentication. So does that mean we need to store the secret in like client's phone, or how does that work?
So the secret should never make it to the client. The secret is stored on our servers. We will coin like these JWTs, and we store the JWTs in local storage. And then when you're offline, we'll actually essentially we keep an in-memory like cache of all the different write operations. And the nice thing about Firebase with real-time data is that like once you go ahead and write locally, all like read events for that local client are actually fired. And so you're able to like update the UI even though like you're offline. And then when you actually reconnect, we'll go ahead and take that queued, thing of writes and sync it with the server. And it's possible that like you have some merge conflicts with another client, but we will go ahead and we can't verify like who will necessarily win the merge. It's whichever one like makes it to the server last, essentially. But we will ensure that each client has the same view of the data, which is really the most important thing.
Thank you.
So 2 questions. Does Firebase support Google two-factor? I'm hoping you say yes. And the other question was on the date picker. Will it play nice with Chrome? The Chrome date field.
So the answer is yes. So if you have OAuth, any of the OAuth providers, you have two-factor set up. That's all handled by the OAuth provider.
The date picker we're working on for Material right now is just its own thing. It's not related to the native date picker in any browser at all.
So my question is actually related to the date picker as well. I was wondering whether there would be support for Moment.js, because that's a very popular library for parsing dates.
So the plan is the date picker is going to be totally agnostic to whatever date locale library you're going to be using. It is going to just provide an API for you to give it anything related to like date parsing, formatting, and localization. And I plan on when we build the demo for it on our sites page, our docs page, it is going to be using Moment.js as an example.
Cool. More questions? Over here? Great.
Question about the grid table with column configuration, sorting, pagination, all this nice stuff that Kendo UI is famous for. And then about the file upload widget. Is it on the plan?
Okay, so we do plan on building a data table for Angular Material that will have many features, including things like sticky headers, sticky columns, and like everything else. But it is a very complicated thing to do, and it is rather far off. It's not going to be landing anytime in the near future, and we do not have any plans to build an uploader of any kind.
Over here. Good.
So quick question about session validation with Firebase. So if I want to create a feature which was basically sign out of all sessions, or if I ban a user and I don't want them accessing my data anymore, does Firebase or JWTs have something built in to handle that?
Yeah, so the short answer is that with Firebase, you can't actually invalidate all the sessions for one user, at least not yet, although that is something we are planning to fix. But you could, if you had an issue where like your secret someone stole your secret and now like they have access to validate all of these tokens, you can go ahead and like revoke your secret, which will invalidate all users' sessions, and then create a new secret, and Firebase will handle all of that for you.
Cool. Over here.
Some material. The intent is this is a complete framework, like to replace something like Bootstrap or whatever, right? With the grids and everything. And what's the timeline for having something that's complete enough for folks to use?
So we currently have a number of users already in production with the components, even though we've maintained that we're still pre 1.0. People are using them successfully. We are hoping to get to a 1.0 before the end of the year, but no absolute promises, as anyone in software will skirt around. But yes, the idea is not so much to say like, oh, this is an alternative to Bootstrap, but though like you might see it that way. It's more of looking at the material design specification and trying to provide an implementation of that.
More questions? All right, over here.
Regarding Angular material, or how do you guys see the partnership with like the Polymer team? So for some of the more complex directives, like a date picker, where it makes sense to kind of have that data flowing back and forth, but like for like a button, does it make sense to recreate it for Angular, or how are you guys communicating with the other teams?
Well, the idea for the Angular material components is that they are built totally on Angular, and Polymer, they have their own framework for doing a lot of like fundamental things like accessibility and things like that. And so in a way, they're kind of incompatible underneath we were talking about like sharing the code. But if you wanted to, it's very possible to like use the Polymer components in an Angular application. I know people have done that, and I don't know about the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, you can use, in Angular 2, it's actually very easy to use web components, and Polymer being one of the implementers. There will be some differences in Angular 2 where you may, for performance reasons, want to pick the Angular-based components. Or if you want to keep the download size of your app small, like, because like Jeremy says, like Polymer has their own implementation of a lot of the things that Angular does. So we support both, but maybe the lightweight, faster way is to use the Angular components.
Is there a node package for the Firebase if I have to do it on the server side?
Yeah, so the JavaScript library works in Node. You just do npm install Firebase, and you can do require Firebase. And the Android version also works on the Java JVM, so you can use it just as well on your server if you want to.
So if I do it on server, how do I manage the API key or the API secret, or is that all taken care by the Firebase?
Right. So you just call the same exact methods as you saw like in my demo. OAuth doesn't work because like OAuthing, you can do OAuth via a token,
Okay.
but you can't obviously do like a pop-up flow in Node. But yeah, creating email password users and logging them in, same exact code.
Okay, sounds good.